Now, please welcome to the stage our speakers for this panel, Isaka Ouedraogo, Director at Sahel Politica, Reda Liamouri, Senior Fellow at the Policy Center for the New South, Sean Holtz, Deputy Director at the United States Africa Command, and Abdelhak Bassou, Senior Fellow at the Policy Center for the New South. Before giving the floor to the chair for this session, we will view a short introductory video for the panel.
Internal challenges and facing a transition period, such as Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. It seeks to identify the conditions and options conducive to fostering peace and stability in the Sahel. By examining crises in the region, the panel will explore valuable lessons and effective mediation strategies that are aimed at preventing its fragmentation. Furthermore, it will assess the roles of both regional and international actors in supporting these efforts and ensuring their success and sustainability. What lessons can be learned from the crisis in the Sahel? What mediation strategies are in place and proposed to ensure a smooth transition to constitutional rule?
Mounia, Boucetta, the floor is yours.
It's okay? Okay, sorry. Good morning, everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome you in the third panel of the APSACO 2024 edition. So thank you for joining us. Today we'll continue the discussion what started yesterday about the context of mediations in specific situation of the Sahel region. So our discussion will, as I said, will continue on the global picture, how our different parties are involved, what are the conditions and requirements to have successful process, what kind of mediation strategy we can implement to prevent fragmentation, leadership fragmentations, then what role could be played by different actors, because we know that there are different levels. We have international level, regional, continental, and national level. So how can all these parts be involved to conduct with efficiency the mediation process? So we have many questions, and we also have the security issues, because also how to secure the condition to conduct this mediation. We have to guarantee security environment and to be sure that all the parts are secured in being involved in this process. So I'm very pleased to have with me our esteemed panelists. So let me introduce them. So we have Reda Liamouri, Senior Fellow at Policy Center for the New South, Isaka Ouedraogo, Director of the Sahel Politica, Sean E. Holtz, Deputy Director of AFRICOM G5, and Abdelhak Bassou, Senior Fellow at Policy Center for the New South. So I'm sure that we'll have a very interesting discussion and also a very interactive session with the audience. We will have the opportunity to announce one question that will be posted, and you will have to react on that by one word. So I start by giving the floor to Reda Liamouri to give the evaluation of the global, or giving the global picture of the situation on Sahel-Saharan region. What are the main issues, and what are your recommendations if you want to implement successful process of mediation? Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you. And thank you to the Policy Center for continuing to organize this event, which has been very successful. And congratulations to Monsieur Hudegi on this event. I think it's good to set the stage and examine the crisis. Is first how we got here. how we got to the current situation, and how we continue to be in this situation. A lot of people will think it started in 2012 or 2011, but in fact, it started decades ago. So I think it's not the problem of terrorism, because that's the catchy word, if you will say. But the problem didn't start with terrorism. It didn't start with the violent extremist organizations, but these groups actually exploited problems that have existed for decades in the region. And it started in Mali, and then it spread out to Niger and Burkina Faso. When I said that it started decades ago, because there were existing conflicts, and the states, for example, in Mali, when they tried to manage the existing conflicts, they used communities against each other. So what does, to manage the conflicts and to weaken the enemy, if you will like to say. And what does that do is that divides communities rather than unifying them. And that's why we continue to see divided communities in all the three countries. And that's the main struggle for this governments right now, is to how to unify the countries, the communities. And the international community then to jump in, and there were talks about how Mali was an example for democracy, and same thing for Niger later on. And there are presidents and other governments that have done so much damage to their states. The corruption that took place and scandals that took place during these regimes has led to the current situation. That's why it has frustrated communities, that have frustrated, including the military. The militaries, and eventually led to the coup d'etats. I'm not saying I'm not supporting the coup d'etats, but the previous regimes have put us in this situation today. And of course, the international community has, I will stop short from saying failed, from all this stabilization, for stabilization efforts. Could that be it, military interventions? Could be also the peacekeeping mission by MINUSMA. Could also be all the security reforms and training of the national armies. And I think what could we learn from that and this failure is that I think the international community is naive and also lacked to comprehend the main problem in the region. I recall a conversation with the MINUSMA official, clearly stated we had no idea what we are walking into in Mali. And that just sums it up. Like, it's just so complex, the issue, they lacked that comprehension. The other thing I think another lesson learned is the gap that exists between the situation on the ground and the grassroots of the problems and the policymakers. There is a significant gap between what's happening on the ground and the reality. When I talk to people in Washington, D.C., and how they see the issue is totally, it is a huge gap of what's the reality on the ground. And there is this also, I call it this obsession about issues that not necessarily address the conflict. I will mention few, for example, migration, the obsession about migration, the obsession about terrorism. And more recently, the obsession about new actors, the obsession about Russia, for example. So what does that do is, so now instead of focusing the issues that could resolve the conflict, now we are focusing on external actor. We focusing on Russia, what Russia is doing in West Africa or doing in Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, instead of focusing what should we do with the local partners. To be brief, and just to jump into some quick recommendations, and I think the theme of this conference, we keep talking about internal conflicts, internal issues. So when we talk about mediation and dialogue, so it has to be internal first, before engaging with international mediators. I think it's important to understand like how we could bring in, as I talked earlier about division within communities within the country. I think we need to find a way to bring in different communities to the table. For example, in Mali, bringing in people from different regions, with different issues to the table to negotiate and have that dialogue internally before bringing in outside mediators. When I say internal, and I have always said this, the issues are at the micro level, at the very local level. And violent extremist organizations have been successful doing that. For example, negotiating deals with local communities in areas where the state is almost non-existent. They negotiated deals because they understood the communities. They provided them security. They provided them with justice. They allowed them to conduct their economic activities. For example, as we speak, they negotiate, as the rainy season, for example, starts now, they negotiate access to farming land with farmers so they could let them go and farm their land. They negotiate with fishers so they could have access to fishing parts of the Niger River or even in the Lake Chad Basin. So they are negotiating with local communities. Second recommendation, so the first recommendation is to have that internal dialogue at the micro level. Second recommendation, we have to do our own analysis when it comes to mediation. If I'm coming to sit down on a table with someone or an entity, I have to do my own analysis, my own due diligence, so when I sit at the table, I understand what are the red lines. What can I offer, what I cannot offer? What are the issues? So for example, yesterday we spoke about you need people that can talk to military leaders, same thing. So you come into the table ready to negotiate. And I think when coup d'etats happened in Mali, Niger, I think ECOWAS rushed in unprepared, unprepared to negotiate with the coup leaders. So I think we have to be prepared. And again, to go to the first recommendation, it has to be and doing that analysis ahead prepares you. I'll give you an example. You have international community trying to implement projects in some areas, and you have those communities saying no to those projects. Why? Because the implementers did not understand why those villagers, those communities refused. They didn't do their own analysis ahead of time. One example is you have communities refusing for the international implementers to build schools. Why? Because they say once you build schools, then we're going to be targeted by violent extremist organizations. So we want to maintain the status quo. But if you do your analysis ahead, then you can understand and be prepared for that and how to negotiate deals. Why the community leaders will refuse to work with us. So we have to do that own analysis ahead. Third and final recommendation is, I'm not saying that we should isolate the Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso because of the decisions that they have made today, but I think we should think of ways to have a quick wins. Why they are willing to work with mercenary groups because of those quick wins, for example. They struck deals with them on for example, on how to recapture Kidal region and northern Mali. So we have to think of ways of how we could have those quick wins. When we talk about security support, there have been a lot of training, a lot of equipment provision, but those trainings, a lot of those trainings focused on urban terrorism. But most of the terrorism and most of violence in the Sahel region is rural. So you don't need to train them on how to rescue hostages from hotels or how to defend their base. I mean, I'm not saying those should be trained, but at the same time, the focus should be more on rural insurgency rather than urban. And I will stop here.
Thank you. Thank you, Reda. Thank you very much for your very interesting insight about reality on the ground, and the importance to address the macro level of the situation. Thank you also for your valuable recommendations. Je passe à Isaka maintenant.
I will hand it over to Isaka if I can invite you to need a headset.
I will invite you to complete the picture, focusing again on the ground, what is happening and how are the different parts are involved. So you're speaking French. Okay, so.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much to the PCNS for the invitation. I believe that the theme selected for this year's edition is on point. I heard yesterday, I believe it was the expert from the Crises group that called for the made for a call to advocate for the alliance of regimes of the military in the Sahel region. And I believe that it is an excellent idea because given the tensions that Mr. Lamouri has just mentioned, in 2023, 2024, we have some peaks of tensions, not only regarding political governance, security governance, but also governance in terms of regional relations. It comes to no surprise for anyone here when I mention that internally that there seem to be some oppositions that are developing and some are radicalizing. There is an exiled Malian government that has been created. There are some exiled movements from Burkina Faso. There's also a patriotic alliance for the renewal of the national renewal, and so they also claim that they aim to use force to counter the regime. Now, regarding ECOWAS and the tensions with them, and I think the situation speaks for itself. When we take a look at the neighboring countries, each state from the region seems to have a point of tension or another with a neighboring country. If we were to take a look at the issue of the tensions in this region and between this region and ECOWAS, I believe that this plea is very much justified because here the clock is ticking. January 25th, 2025, these states in this region will be completely out of ECOWAS. If there's no move forward, and if by then nothing has been done, what scenario will we be faced with? Will it be a scenario of two regional blocks that are fighting with each other or at odds with each other, or if negotiations are led, can we maybe consider having two blocks that coexist peacefully, or will there be a Cold War with potential hotspots? I believe that there is a consensus in this room on the need and the relevance of normalizing a path towards peace, but also normalization, not only in terms of economic relations, but also political relations with the countries in the Sahelian Gulf and around Guinea. Before we can consider a potential mediation project, I believe it is necessary to take stock of the task at hand here, because the relevance of a mediation and the spin-offs are obvious. But is this the case? Can we say that this is the case if we were to reverse the perspective and if we were to role play and try to put ourselves in the shoes of an advisor or a captain or a colonel in Ouaga or Bamako or Niamey? Mr. Lamouri said that we needed to do our homework, and as an observer, I believe that the first assignment in our homework is to figure out who this advocacy or who this plea will be addressed to, because in the conventional mediation situation, there are at least two protagonists that wish to be addressed. And here, are we talking about Burkina Faso? Do we talk to Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali individually? Should we reach out? I can't find the term in French, says the speaker. Collectively, as a region. And someone even mentioned the endogenous factor. Mr. Yamuri said that mentioned that as a subset for certain points, but the presence of external factors definitely has an influence on the decision made, including the decision of whether we embark on a negotiation or not. So do we bring these people around the table, or how do we factor them in?
Second point or condition. My recommendation on this is to really do our homework and to ascertain what we will be doing. Second condition, what would our pitch be to talk just like a salesperson? How am I going to pitch the product? For the product must be attractive. Hence, the advocacy should raise the interest to the target to which it is being sent. So here, what if they can raise any objections? Let's put ourselves in the shoes of persons who have objections in Ouaga, Bamako, and Niamey, and hence, of course, what there is to be gained from a negotiation. Let's now take, by way of instance, the point of the return to a normal constitutional life. Of course, I may act in ill faith and say in Ouaga the transition is over. We don't even talk about a transition nowadays. We have extended the mandate of the authorities by 5 years. We have used a decree which does not refer anymore to transition. The president of the transition becomes the head of state, and it is a charter of a transition or a transition charter that has been negotiated between the local authorities without ECOWAS, wherefrom we have exited, and whose constraints and limitations and standards are not binding anymore on us. So I need not mediation at the end of the day. Now, on something the like of political dialogue, one can be objected that priority is security. We will do national reconciliation when and where we would have made headway on the security. Now, on dialogue with the armed groups, one objective may be said whereby we've already attempted to do that, and we've known what is the result, that we have made the option for military solution. It did not work because we were not having enough staff and we were not manned women enough, and we did not take any offensive. Now we do that. Plus, we have the support of other external partners. Give us some time, and we will be calling back on you when we would have reinstalled a report of force which would allow it to negotiate with the jihadists on strong points, and once we would have solved the question. Now, from a personal standpoint, what is there to be gained? Maybe there's everything to be lost from their very perspective. If I look into the coups, the coup foilers and the putschists of the year 1990 to the year 2000, but for some of them, most have been exiled and have been brought before the International Court of Justice, ICJ. So maybe we'll have to define the terms of really pondering on these very questions and issues. Could you please conclude, gentlemen? Yes, I will. Yes, madam. Now, at the end of the day, if we look into what could the potential candidates be to really submit and do the mediation, I think of examples, successful cases that we may tempted to forget. So this is the first charter of negotiations has been negotiated with the ECOWAS. Maybe some good practice there. But these past 3 years, Togo has successfully released 46 Ivorian soldiers that were also I think they have been also asked by ECOWAS to raise whatever objections by Niger. So maybe we will have to go and see what good practices have allowed these negotiations to be successful. Now, finally, on the militaries. Someone said that we need to learn, if not to know, how to speak to the militaries. I think the militaries would be good in talking to militaries, isn't it? Up until the 3rd of June, there has been a joint drill or exercise between the EIAS states, Chad, and the militaries of Togo, or the Togolese army. A lot of African states do have military academies and institutes, and these training venues are venues where the militaries do know one another, do have their network. Someone was also saying that we may think of a mediation whereby people having economic interests. I'm also of the opinion that the military diplomacy could also aid in that respect, and I'll stop there. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Saka, for these enlightening and very close to the field view, and which raises very relevant questions on the real protagonists, on the conditions towards ease and normalization, standardization between the different parts and the different parts that are taken into account, as well as whatever education and lessons learned that have been successful. Anyway, you have zeroed in on the priority of security. Priority, yeah. Alors, ceci.
So, Sean E. Holtz, Deputy Director of AFRICOM, just to discuss about the importance of security and the role that could be played by a military body to secure a successful mediation process. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I first want to start by saying thank you for the Policy Center for the New South to give me the opportunity to give the military's regional perspective on internal crises in the Sahel. And so on behalf of our combat commander at United States Africa Command, again, thank you. So I'll start with saying we don't do anything on our own. We work with our allies and partners, and AFRICOM with allies and partners counters transnational threats and malign actors. We strengthen security forces and respond to crisis to promote security, stability, and prosperity across Africa. And we do this through what we call a 3D effort. It's the foundation. The first D is diplomacy, the second one is development, and then the last D is defense. The diplomacy effort is done through the Department of State. The second one is with organizations such as USAID, the United States Agency for International Development, and then for the continent of Africa, it's United States Africa Command. We focus on building African partner nation capacity through our security assistance programs, our exercises, our military-to-military engagements, and also our key leader engagements. And we do that through our Office of Security Cooperation, which is embedded within our embassies, and that's what I do out of Stuttgart, Germany, as I work with these security cooperation offices to work security cooperation programs. And everything we do on the continent is African partner-led and U.S. and ally-enabled. So here are some of the things that we do. When it comes to partnerships, the United States provides training, advisory, support, equipment, and other bilateral and regional assistance to help strengthen our African partners' military, justice, and civilian law enforcement capabilities. We work to deepen defense relationships that are rooted in equality, mutual respect, and join with new partners and build new coalitions to oppose aggression and uphold sovereignty. We work to empower our partners to pursue and lead local, national, and regional-led solutions to security challenges they face. Now, within AFRICOM, we have what's called the Multinational Cooperation Center, which is comprised of 21 partner nations and 3 international organizations. And they work as our foreign liaison officers to help support us on the continent in the cases of conflict or crisis. And most of our partners right now, excuse me, are European partners. And they'll have embassies in countries. And so if there is an issue, we can reach out to them through our foreign liaison officers to either request assistance or ask if they need assistance. And that's become very useful in the past. The other partnership program that we have, and I'm a little bit biased towards it because I'm a guardsman in the United States, and we have a state partnership program. I was talking to some members yesterday about this, and really what it provides is we have 50 states, we have 3 territories, and the District of Columbia. And each one of these states, territories, and the district have a state partnership program somewhere in the world. The continent of Africa right now has 19 of these state partnership programs, and it's an enduring relationship. And what's different from that, just to kind of give you a little background on state guard programs, is under the governor of each state, they control an Air and an Army National Guard. And this program is in addition to, not in lieu of what we do at US AFRICOM to support the state. And it becomes helpful, and I'll talk more about it here in a little bit, of how a state partnership program can provide assistance when possibly the active component cannot. As far as operations, AFRICOM maintains pressure on malign networks through a balance of operations and engagements with partners on the continent. And we do this mostly through an advise and assist effort. With our African partners, we conduct military operations to disrupt, degrade, and neutralize violent extremist organizations that present transnational threats. When it comes to defense institutional building, AFRICOM works with partners through their ministries of defense and other security institutions to enhance capacity to organize, administer, employ, manage, maintain, sustain, or otherwise oversee their security forces. We invest in professional, civilian-led militaries, and we're candid with our partners when their security institutions fall short of universal standards. There's 2 professional programs that I'd like to mention, and the first is our International Military Education Program, and this is mostly for our officers, or I should say our partner nation officers. Candidates are selected to attend one of our senior service academies within the United States, and not only do they get a great professional military education, I think more importantly, they build relationships with their classmates that go on for a long time. So a partner will select one of their superstars, their rock stars for the future, allow them to go into one of the courses, but again, they become good friends that they can reach back to in the United States, probably get put on the speed dial so that they can reach out to them. The other one is more of an enlisted, non-officer, senior or professional military education opportunity, and through CTAF-AF, which is Southern European Task Force Africa, which is located out of Vicenza, they actually provide professional military education opportunities, again, at the enlisted level, and then the state partnership programs that I talked about, where a state within the United States will reach out and provide additional professional military education. So now I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk about a couple of issues that we address. They aren't new by any means, but as far as the way that we're approaching it, AFRICOM's handling it a little bit differently. The first one is climate change. And we know climate change drives instability, and our African partners are disproportionately impacted. We already see how climate change is forcing mass migration, creating competition and conflict over our resources, or over their resources rather, and opening opportunities for violent extremist organizations to exploit livelihood insecurity. These challenges are particularly acute in areas with weak governance. Since 2022, US AFRICOM has undertaken several initiatives to better understand and integrate these strategies, and they've done this primarily through 2 conferences that we currently hold. We've held since 2022, and that is our Security Implications in Climate Change Conference. Last year we held that in Gabon, and this year it will be held, in fact, next month in Côte d'Ivoire. And the importance of that conference is really to bring together our partner nations to talk about the challenges of climate change and what it's creating. And it might get at the root cause of a lot of the problems that we see, especially in the Western Sahel. The next one is civilian harm. Our Secretary of Defense has enforced a program that we are putting forth, and it's called the Civilian Harm and Mitigation Reduction Program. And it's a Department of Defense effort to mitigate and respond to civilian harm during military operations. And this isn't necessarily activities that the United States does. We are very concerned about it throughout the world, but it really is when we work with African partners, we want to ensure and set a baseline that they're seriously looking at civilian harm mitigation. And when it comes to mitigating and responding to civilian harm, we have to get it right by doing it right. The protection of civilians is a moral imperative, and the responsibility we take is serious. And we share this commitment of protecting civilians with our African partners, and we look forward to working together to achieve our shared objectives. Now, that's what AFRICOM does writ large. I want to talk about what we do in the Sahel region. And right now, I'll tell you, AFRICOM is focused predominantly on the Sahel region, and I'm sure most of you are tracking a lot of what's going on. We're intensely focused on the challenges to security in West Africa and the Sahel region. Our military deployment abroad operates only on the invitation of the governments, and we respect the sovereignty of those governments. Violent extremist organizations thrive in areas of instability. Coups provide space for violent extremist organizations to operate, and they make it challenging for us to address. When there's a coup, we are restricted by certain policy that will not allow us to do security cooperation programs, and that, again, handcuffs us from doing what we would prefer to do. As many are tracking the news with Niger, the United States is doing a secure and safe withdrawal out of Niger at the request of the government or the CNSP. I would say, if I'm looking back at yesterday on some of the things that we discussed when it comes to mediation, and by the way, the military is not one to do mediation. We support and help facilitate the mediation effort. But what's important in our withdrawal, for example, with Niger, is the communication. And through communication, we have been clear on what it is that we want to do and transparent. And I think what that has allowed us to do is to continue to build a relationship, to maintain a relationship, and to, after we leave Niger, maintain bilateral relations with Niger to counter violent extremist organizations. In Chad, again, we have been there for years as far as counterterrorism and counter-VEO, counter-violent extremist organization opportunities. But we recently redeployed a small contingent of troops, and right now we're working with the Chadian government and discussing our future operations in Chad. For Mali, the violence against civilians has increased since the military transition government seized power. What we are observing in Mali is happening throughout the Sahel. Terrorist groups use violence and expand control. And terrorists are further able to recruit and coerce, expanding their ranks. Burkina Faso limits our ability, and what's going on in Burkina Faso limits our ability to provide support to their counter-violent extremist organization operations. The United States has urged the transition government to come to an agreement with ECOWAS on a timeline to return to a democratically elected civilian government. However, policy does not restrict, but it permits those state partnership programs that I was talking about. So under the restrictions that I was talking about earlier when it comes to a coup, at least our state partnership programs can contribute to continuing security cooperation programs. To conclude, I've been asked to provide 3 actionable recommendations. And again, AFRICOM implements policy. We don't make it. So instead, I'd just like to close with 3 takeaways. The first one, violent extremists, and by the way, these takeaways are very broad. And so the first one, violent extremist organizations thrive in areas of instability. Coups provide space for violent extremist organizations to operate and make it challenging for us to address those threats. Number 2, AFRICOM remains focused on working with our African partners and other agencies in a whole-of-government approach to address insecurity, overcome development, and economic challenges and support democracy. And then finally, number 3, we stand with the African people in working towards these common goals that we share. That's all I have, and I look forward to any questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing with us the different programs that are developed by AFRICOM, and thank you also for giving the picture about how military can facilitate the process and support the process, especially in Sahel region. And you highlighted the importance of communication to build and maintain relationship between countries. So now I moved to our last speaker, Abdelhak Bassou, vous allez nous apporter un regard.
We're going to really cast an additional look on what has been presented to us a moment ago, and mostly with the political security at different levels and the roles of different stakeholders in managing this crisis and how to abound towards a successful mediation-led process. Over to you, sir. Thank you, Madam Boucetta. I do reckon that many a thing has been said on and around this very region, both from a security military standpoint as well as the possibilities of mediation offered to us. What maybe there remains to be said is to really highlight the very complex nature of the political insecurity as well related as well as the complexity of the mediation effort, if mediation effort is there to be undertaken. Now, by saying complexity, this is tantamount to saying that this complexity hails mostly, if you will, from the multiplicity of levels, of strata, of tensions on conflictuality, and the interpenetration between these different levels. First, let's first agree on between whom the tensions do exist. And the first rung, these are the three states. We have these three states that are opposed to ECOWAS. I'm talking about about Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Now, these states are individually opposed to ECOWAS, which ECOWAS has had stances, postures, and attitudes of a certain nature at the time where these countries have been the subject of purge. Individually, with every country, ECOWAS has had attitudes. Let me recorrect that. Commissions has been earmarked and seconded to those countries, and the ECOWAS has really self-proclaimed itself as being a mediator. But when the ECOWAS went to visit these countries after the putches, it went there much more by a notifier of ultimatums of sanctions. Proof of that, you have 6 months to do this. Let's you do that, we will do this. Already there is a latent conflict individually between these three conflicts and with the ECOWAS. Now then, at the time where the AOS was created, another conflict has been created between the AOS as such and ECOWAS, because for ECOWAS we were almost creating a structure, a parallel integration structure. In the eyes of ECOWAS, maybe that would give the example to follow to other countries who are going to create other integration structures. And of course, it's born out of that another conflict between the AOS as such and ECOWAS. On these two levels, both at the AOS and at the level of each of these countries, the question that was raised is whether ECOWAS, which is now imposing itself as a mediator, does really fill in the conditions of mediator. Fact is, what ECOWAS is doing is much more negotiate with these different countries. It's not a mediator. It cannot really self-proclaim itself a mediator because it's judging party. And by the way, the mediation manual guide spelled out by ECOWAS itself reads as follows: the mediator should be neutral, impartial, cannot be neutral and partial if it is also a judge in the case in point. And hence, ECOWAS cannot say, I am a mediator in the conflicts that I have as ECOWAS with these countries. So you cannot be judge and party. Generally, we ought to have gone elsewhere to look for a negotiator or mediator. I think the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, has tried to intervene between these three countries, but it didn't work out. Now, already, we are the first stratum of conflictuality where interrogations are being raised on and around any mediation-led operations. Now, the second rung, a level of conflictuality, of insecurity, instability, is terrorism. Well, as far as this is concerned, the problem there is, can we indulge in mediation between the authorities of such states and the armed groups, and to what some call them terrorists, others call them, many do have their ideas about this, but generally it is being said that we are not discussing the fact that we don't discuss in principle with the terrorists, and there is not even the slightest possibility of thinking that we may entertain a mediation thereon. Others have, at a certain time, thought that these groups do not really look like the international terrorism, and that rather they are persons with whom maybe there are possibilities of discussion, but in which case, who is going to do the mediation? Some religious heads, scholars, traditional scholars, and chiefs, etc., all of which has been thought of, but it has still been state-mated because of this principle whereby we don't discuss with terrorists, quote-unquote. The third level of conflictuality now pertains to Mali. And why am I talking about Mali? And I'm also considering it to be a level of conflictuality because of the three countries of the AES. It's Mali that seems to be at least perceived as being the leader of operations. The other two states seem to do and to use Mali as their champion/locomotive. Now the conflict in Mali is one of, first, with terrorists, we've talked about that, but Malians have the other question of separatism, that is to say the Azawad region in the Tuareg region, albeit Tuareg themselves are clans, tribes, and parties in their own rights. Now the first mediator who has been imposed for about 30 years is Algeria. But as of late, with the new installed authorities in Mali, I think that the role of Algeria is now a thing of the past. And the Malian authority do not want Algeria anymore to discharge of that role of mediator for many a reason that I will not talk about here. Suffice it to say that Malians do what these reasons are. Now, can we have another mediator? For since the authorities of Mali have recouped the city of Vidal and they have reinstated their authorities in the north parts of Mali, since then there has been a change of paradigm, not to say in the attitude of the separatist movements, i.e., what has up until there the permanent framework for peace, security, and development has today become the strategic, then a permanent, stand-in permanent framework for the Azawad people. So we're now heading towards, if I may say, a military calling, a military vocation, that one which advocates violence. But even if today this new strategic stand-in permanent framework for the Azawad people says that it only claims for a political and legal status for the Azawad. Translation, it would maybe accept a formula of widened, enlarged autonomy. To do that and to have that, they would have to talk with the Bamako-based authorities. The contact seems to be difficult, and in which case the question is who can really be the organization that would bring them together. Algeria, it's done with. African Union, does the AU know that region perfectly? For having really discussed with some of them, they don't really know that from the AU. There is only one country that knows, if not very well, the region of the question is Mauritania. But would Mauritania be willing and available to do so? And also today within the framework of Mauritania and I don't know.
Il y a le Maroc qui
Morocco also holds, entertains
avec les.
Morocco also has very good relationships with the three countries. Would Morocco like to do it, and is it qualified for that? So it is hard to find a mediator between the Malians, Spain, and Mali and Spain. So those who are the brothers in arms, whom yesterday were also the brothers in arms and people of ENA. Today they've joined people of the 18 Dus Hak tribe. They've joined the state, and they could potentially go to talk to their brothers in the north in order to try to gather them and see what can be done. And this is the third tier, and there might be a fourth tier, which is of the foreign powers in this region who's gonna join them, since they have diverging interests between France and Russia, for example, and the United States, for example, today. Also, you know very well that the authorities of these countries are asking them to leave, and Russia's coming big time. So this is further increasing the contextuality, antagonistic pressures, and who can mediate in the midst of all that. So this is just to, you know, highlight how complex the situation is, and if a mediator has to do something, he will need to look into all of these questions, because dealing with one issue without dealing with all issues could lead to a future that would not be desirable. Thank you. Thank you very much for reminding us of the complexity of mediation in this region with the whole political, economic, environmental context, etc. And you have asked deep questions about the protagonists that should be around a mediation table with the different tiers, regional, national, and foreign powers, and who could be playing the role of a mediator. So this is a multiple variable question. It needs construction engineering in terms of mediation. It does not require a classic type of mediation, but a complex system with several levels, interventions, and articulations enabling to reach a safe objective. Now we still have 20 minutes. Without further ado, I'd like to first thank our speakers and open the panel to your questions. If there are any questions, we could open now a Q&A session. I see a first hand over there. A second one over there. Please introduce yourselves before you ask your question. Thank you.
Can you present yourself, please?
I can't hear what he's saying because he's not speaking in the microphone.
Allow us into a more holistic approach, I think, in which, you know, building trust with marginalized communities where this violence is occurring, and bringing development in whichever form can take their place along with mediation. I would like to have your opinion on that idea. Nobody in particular, as I said, but just throw it out there to see how recalibrating the approach towards violent extremism may give us space in our heads to think of different approaches on how to tackle this problem.
Merci. Bellemleh Mustafa, ancien des Nations Unies. La question est un peu, il y a le médiateur qui est supposé être indépendant, neutre, honnête, crédible. Et puis il y a les parties prenantes, nationales, bon, les conflits internes. Et à côté des parties prenantes nationales, il y a les parties prenantes qui sont liées d'une façon ou d'une autre ou qui peuvent apporter une solution. Quand on est médiateur et qu'on ne peut pas apporter une solution, ça n'ajoute pas grand-chose. Mais quand on est médiateur et on arrive à attirer les parties prenantes qui peuvent avoir une contribution positive, ça pourrait être les ressources, parce que résoudre un conflit, c'est des ressources, l'argent, c'est des ressources politiques, c'est des ressources intellectuelles. Et quand on n'a pas ces trois, et quand le médiateur n'arrive pas à amener avec lui ou avec elle ces parties prenantes, c'est un peu le sens de ma question d'hier. Il faut que quelqu'un qui soit impliqué ait également quelque chose à gagner ou à perdre. Mais surtout à perdre quand il n'y a pas installation de paix. Comment on assure cette question? Comment on peut, par exemple, dans le cas des pays du Sahel, avoir en même temps un médiateur qui soit honnête, crédible et qui connaît un peu la situation, mais également qui arrive à parler à ceux-là et à les amener à la table qui peuvent apporter une solution politique, économique, l'argent, les ressources, etc. Ça, c'est très, très important. Comment on peut faire cela? Merci.
Bonjour, je suis de l'agence mauritanienne d'information.
Agency of training, my intervention is directed to all panelists, but more particularly to Mr. Abdel Haq, since he mentioned perspectives and the relevance of mediation of countries such as Mauritania or Morocco in conflicts. Discussing the case of Mauritania, he indicated that there were some challenges with the Malian authorities. So I'd like to say in that regard that indeed we recently witnessed some events at the border, yet Mauritanian authorities dealt with this matter with a lot of caution, reminding that Mali is a brother country and that borders haven't been formally traced so far. Therefore, it is fully understandable that some armed convoys might cross the border without realizing it sometimes. So it does not mean that this is a deliberate or pre-intentional action from Malian authorities. That's why Mauritanian, even if they have the capacity to react, they decided to stay calm and treat the Malian brothers with lots of regards. And Mauritania, in addition, nowadays welcomes hundreds of thousands of Malian refugees. And they refrained from applying the ECOWAS instructions when they decided to impose an economic embargo on Mali. So this proves the relevance of Mauritania playing the role of a potential mediator. And I think it's the same for Morocco. I don't know the main elements, but I think it's quite relevant. So I'd like to ask, what are the chances for the new Senegalese authorities in a mediation process? The Senegalese president visited Mali. They visited actually the three countries, and then so far I don't think that there's been any tangible results in that sense. Yet it's not been fully rejected So if you have more in-depth analysis or other kinds of information, I would be interested. Thank you for your comment and questions. Okay, so I'm quite interested, yes.
At Al-Akhawain University. So I would like to ask you, what do you see as the main drivers of international crisis in the Sahelo-Saharan region? And how can regional cooperation and coordination help address these challenges? And also, what specific policy recommendation would you propose for strengthening regional security and stability in this volatile area? And what could be eventually Morocco's role within this mediation? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we take another question just behind you, then I move there. Okay. Il y a une question juste derrière monsieur, comme ça, vous allez directement.
There's a question just behind this gentleman. I'm Mustafa, representative of the Royal Armed Forces. Thank you for your invitation. And I'd like to thank the organizers of the conference, the General Director of AFRICOM. It's a brief and clear question that I have for you. What are the repercussions of misinformation with regard to the mediation process and about the mission of AFRICOM in Africa?
Good morning. My name is Feriza Nefi from the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center. So I would like to speak on what the speaker from AFRICOM spoke about. So he mentioned the other drivers of conflicts, that is migration and then climate change. And he mentioned that they have conferences on climate change. I wanted to find out, have they also incorporated the mediation? I mean, do you think that mediation could be a way to solve climate change? And then the findings from the conference on the climate change. A lot of times, conferences on climate change, we are just talking, but have they been able to present the findings in a way so that the public can know? And then what trainings are they given on the climate change? Then I would also want to ask, how can that's for all the speakers, the gap between grassroots and then policymakers be bridged in the issues of mediation? Because policymakers are up there and then grassroots are up there. So how can that gap be?
Okay, thank you. So the last question, please.
Good morning. My name is Victor Doke, also from KIPTC. So this is more of a comment. When you take Mali, Burkina, and then Niger, and when we see what is happening there. Now, for me, I look at the bigger picture, what led to the current situation now, and what we are doing. When you come or you take into consideration what ECOWAS and the other sub-regional bodies are doing, we lack what I call the sustained engagement, okay, i.e. mediation and whatever, in dealing with these governments or juntas or whatever you want to call it. Until we look at the sustained engagement and then we look at their needs and interests, I think we are rather making or causing a challenge to solve the issue. But if we don't look at it holistically, then we'll just have to be coming back here and then talking about issues, and then the problem will exacerbate. So I think what we are looking at is having a sustained engagement and then looking at the core issues, and then we can get somewhere. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comment. So I move to our panelists. So maybe we start with Rida. You won't have to, which question you can give. Mm-hmm.
You like started with me.
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
Okay. I'll start with Bram's question about the military option. I think what we have seen the military option with stabilization efforts at the same time, and both, as I said, I'm trying to stop short from failing, and we can say they have failed. When we look at the situation today, extremist groups expanded their presence. They started in northern Mali and they expanded to Burkina Faso, Niger, and even to northern Benin, northern Togo, and Ghana, although they have not conducted attacks, but they are present there. The military options, I think they have did a really good job chasing extremist groups from urban centers, from the key towns. But they have failed in more rural areas because they have failed to create an environment for these groups to continue to exist, not only to exist, but also establish legitimacy in those areas. And the military contributed for violent extremist organizations to have that legitimacy. How? By repeatedly carrying extrajudicial killings against certain minorities, certain ethnic groups, mobilizing ethnic militias based on ethnic affiliations. So they have lost further legitimacy, and they gave legitimacy to violent extremist organizations. And that has become very difficult for stabilization efforts. When we talk about trying to reestablish that trust, it's now almost impossible in some parts of the three countries, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, where extremist groups continue to control and govern some space. Stabilization efforts, I think we have to rethink like what stability means and what does it mean in terms of the local context. For example, some of the stabilization efforts that took place that are more technical. Building a school or rehabilitating a military base or checkpoints doesn't mean that you have addressed and brought stability. So it's a technical problem, but rather you did not address the root causes, which are why these extremist groups have legitimacy in these areas. So you have to ask the difficult questions. And I think that's goes to your question about the gap between policymakers and the grassroots, because policymakers have difficulty addressing and understanding, comprehending those like grassroots. As I mentioned, like they have the difficulty of saying to talking to local partners, national partners, and telling them exactly if you need to move away from the conflicts and regain legitimacy in this part of the country, you need to do X, Y, and Z. So having that hard conversation has not been happening, at least not to my knowledge, and it has allowed these groups to continue to exist.
Oui,
Okay.
You still have no comments?
No, I'll give them. I'll let others speak.
Yeah, okay. Issaka, peut-être réagir par rapport à...
Issaka, would you like to react with regard to these questions? Yes, I'd like to react to a couple of these questions. The first one is about the failure of the military option. We all agree that in theory and in practice, we all know that all conflicts are to be solved around a table. Otherwise, you can't really find a solution. That's why the military option is so seducing for AIS regimes, because it's the main sales argument that legitimizes the military in power and their upkeeping in power in spite of everything that happens. I don't know if you followed the situation in Burkina since September 2022. The government has referred to several coup attempts that were led to failure because the populations and their partisans systematically they defend the military regimes, even if the results in the field are poor in spite of massive investments. And this is quite strategic, by the way, in terms of recruitment, equipment, and personnel. In order to cover more territory, the results are not 100% satisfactory, but they're still decent. If we take, for example, the case of Burkina Faso, the government claims to have reconquered 64% of the territory. So it means that 43% of the territory are still in the hands of these armed groups. And therefore, it's not only the secondary cities and the capital, it's the rural areas. And paradoxically, these are the biggest supporters of the military. So another comment, I can't tell you exactly which country the person who asked that question comes from. Yet one of the big ideological levers of these militaries is nationalism or patriotism. So everybody's supposed to love their country. And it's very hard to tell someone, okay, the military option is not going to lead you to anywhere, and is just going to give you 43%. You already have, 43% of the territory that's invaded. So let's move now to the question about mediation. I think it's a very fair point. I think somebody mentioned mediation, but I don't know if that's really mediation, what China does. That's good. And the necessary influence to obtain these results. One of these players, in view of the geopolitical tensions that are at play, I can't really understand what kind of sustainability such a candidate will have. Yet the tour that the president did to Ouaga, Bamako, and Niamey, in his tour, he reminded that he was not officially mandated by ECOWAS, and it was an initiative of mere fraternity and African solidarity. He was very well welcomed without specific enthusiasm about proposals that we were not informed of, but he was not legitimated. I think that Togo, Mauritania, and other countries are excellent candidates. And when we talk about Morocco, they have a few arguments that could make them very good for both sides, because they're friends with all of their partners at ECOWAS. But at the same time, Morocco also benefits from a royal and Atlantic initiative offering an alternative to these Sahelian countries in case a solution can be found. I would like to remind you the sanctions that exist. Personally, I'm using Royal Air Maroc to travel to Sahel in and out, but this gives you a couple of psychological interesting arguments that transform these countries into good candidates for mediators. Thank you very much. Sean.
You want to answer to that?
Yes, thank you for the questions, and I'll try and be quick on answering these. So the first question that was put out there deals with misinformation, and we deal with misinformation and disinformation. And really, when I think of disinformation, that's the deliberate attempts to provide false information to counter what we're trying to do. It is getting worse as far as the narrative that is passed out there. So through social media, through things as simple as somebody wearing a T-shirt to a flag that is flown in protest falsely, and then outside individuals that get involved, we continuously see disinformation and misinformation, and we work hard to counter that. It's also challenging with limited, as far as how people get access within the countries, how they get access to information, because in a lot of countries they're limited with Wi-Fi, for example, television, and a lot of times radios, their main means to get the information. So how they get it, and then how we can counter that information. And I would say one of the most important lessons learned that I've seen is the right people have to be the ones that have to dispel what the disinformation and misinformation is. And it may be, number one, the government that knows the truth and resolves the answer. And so finding the right person that will have the trust in the civilian population that will believe what's being put out there. And then from a military side, I'll just say that it continues to evolve as far as how we see the impacts across the world on mis and disinformation. And it is something that we continually have to invest in to ensure that, again, the right narrative is being spoken. For the second question that was out there, when I talked about climate change, again, climate change and the way that we're working it's pretty new. But again, we see the impacts of how it is out there. As far as providing outcomes in our conferences, I personally have not been in any of the conferences, but I would say that it's really just those discussions, kind of like the discussions we have here to provoke thought and to figure out how we move forward and come up with solutions towards it. We're still in nascent stages of determining how we're going to get after climate change and get at the root causes of what we can do to fix it. And as far as training, same thing. Through the discussions that I've had, countries like Kenya are way ahead of this. So when we start talking about it, a lot of times they're like, yes, we've been working on that for years. And so we learn through them on how we can get better, but also through our conferences, how we can better communicate it. So unfortunately, actual training as far as how we train countries to deal with and cope with it, that's where the development phase of USAID get involved with boreholes and developing ways to help cope with the issues of with climate change.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Merci. Je sais que selon
Thank you. I understand that on my watch I still have 26 seconds, so I'll try to be quick. So why would military approaches fail in that region? That's my concern. I think that when France came with their operation, even here today with the Russians, we forget that this is a counter-insurrection war. And in any counter-insurrection wars, the first target is the population, second is the population, the third target is the population. So any actions that will be carried out, any military action will fail in the way that they did not take care of the population. They forgot about them. When you say, okay, we neuter the tourist cell, they're not then opening a school or dwelling a well or make sure that they have fertilizers. They fight against terrorists, but they don't deal with the needs of the population. So this problem remains. It is not a matter of getting some more territory because they're occupied by terrorists. It's to manage that the territories that they have at hand are going to be protected so that terrorists do not come back. Okay, but the second question is also the fact that the parties, the mediators, they have to be honest, credible, accountable. There must be neutral. ECOWAS is not neutral. Algeria is not neutral. So what? Now we have to look at who benefits from that. This is my third question. And my Mauritanian friend, I'd like to thank him because we know that the situation is sometimes hot between Mali and Mauritania, but Mauritanians are very wise and calm, so they know how to handle these issues. Now, I know that Senegal knows Mali, but they don't know the Zawat, so there's a problem there. Senegal knows Mali. They have lots of interests in Mali. We know that there's been a very, very serious issue for Senegal, which is the corridor from the port of Dakar to Bamako. Senegal wants to make sure that the port of Dakar remains the most important port for Bamako, and I agree with them. We should maybe deal with the core issue, the core of evil, and not only look at the external demonstrations of such evil.
Thank you for the contribution of the audience and their interaction. Thank you for the valuable intervention of our speakers. The session is finished. Thank you.
We kindly ask the panel to remain on stage for a photo. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now take a 20-minute coffee break in the dining hall across from this auditorium. We will reconvene at